We're on.
Thank you. We're going to be leading you in the invocations. For those of you who came in who weren't here yesterday, you might want to pick up sheets at the front of the room. The invocations are very simple.
Ty, why don't you grab a few and hand them out there?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Thank you.
Om Shri Ganeshaya Namaha. Repeat. Om Shri Ganeshaya Namaha. Om Shri Saraswatyai Namaha.
Together.
Om Shri Saraswatyai Namaha. Om Namo Gurave Namaha.
Together.
Om Namo Gurave Namaha. Om. Welcome all friends. We're very happy to be on Day 2 of our Sanskrit Immersion Brain Understanding Weekend. So some of the people here will be taking part in the experimental part with the brain with having caps on their heads. And for those of you who don't know, there's a sign-up sheet at the front of the room. We encourage everybody to offer up their heads for this wonderful experience. And we'll be making more announcements about this as the day goes on. We will be also doing introductions again because we have many new people here today. But first, I want to encourage everybody, whether they are sitting in this room or thousands of miles away, to feel that you have the power to do direct experimentation. Our Guru was very much in favor of you try this, you feel how it works. So those of you who are participating in the Sanskrit chanting, the Sanskrit learning, I want you to notice what is the effect on your brain. Is it a little bit easier to meditate the next day or this evening with having had this energy in your body? This can be done not only this weekend, but every time you study. Do your own direct experimentation. And as far as schedule goes, we are incredibly blessed by having Dr. Ken Pugh, who's director of the Haskins Institute at Yale and has other qualifications I'm not going to take the time to list, and his colleague, Dr. Sarah Mulukutla, I hope I have that right. They're going to speak at 11. So from 11 to 11:45, we will have brain research immersion education.
That will be a snippet, a small part of the larger picture that's going to occur this weekend.
It's going to keep unfolding.
And then we will be back at 11:45 to finish up the Sanskrit part until 12:30, 12:15 for lunch. And then the same program this afternoon.
This afternoon, the brain research lecture will be on at 3:30, from approximately 3:30 to 4:15.
In between our Sanskrit, we're making a sandwich.
Sanskrit sandwich. And tomorrow, similarly, we'll have a morning program, and then at 2:30, a morning program with a brain sandwich, Sanskrit sandwich. And then there'll be a panel discussion from like 2:30 to 5.
which we hope everybody who will be here will contribute in the panel discussion.
And a reminder to those of you who are tuning in online, if you have questions, write them. Seth, what do we call where they write it? It's
in the comments section of the Facebook page or the YouTube channel.
okay, in the comments section. Sorry, I'm used to teaching on Zoom, and I don't say chat. So here we say comment section of either YouTube or Facebook. Direct your questions there, and Seth is monitoring them, and we'll get to them. So, very much welcome to everybody. I'm going to ask us to do quick intros. So I will model the quick intro. Shanta and I maybe will both do. So 3 questions mostly. What is your name? Where are you from? What is your background in Sanskrit? And what is your background in other languages? So briefly, my name is Indira. I started Sanskrit at this ashram in 1971 with our guru and had many years with him. Also studied at UC Berkeley and also for many years with a great scholar named Ram Karan Sharma. I have partial passable Spanish, and in the past I have nothing but remnants of French, Russian, and a little bit of Hindi.
My name is Shanta Bolkin. We are married. I met Dr. Mishra here, as his name was at that time, in 1972. The first thing he said to me, and maybe the only thing he said to me all summer, was, if you want to stay here, you must study Sanskrit. 50 years later, we are here sitting with all of you, doing nothing more than we love to share Sanskrit. So we should go around
And
the
we're
room?
currently in San Francisco. So Seth's going to pass the mic around the room if everyone here can contribute name, location, basic background.
My name is Purnima, and I live here at the ashram, at Ananda Ashram. And I was very lucky when I came in the 70s. Guruji began offering me Sanskrit scholarships. In other words, he told me I was going to be on a Sanskrit scholarship. I didn't ask for one. But it was his way of saying, basically, you have to do this. And so I, of course, was very happy. Started studying. I'm not at all advanced. I haven't gone too deeply into memorizing a lot of what's the grammar part, but I adore chanting Sanskrit. I mean, I can feel the benefit. I can feel what it does to my brain and to my body, and just also to my centering my own inner place of peace, of quiet, of balance. So it's something I hope, even as I go more into the decade ahead, that I'll go deeper into. And I have many friends who are encouraging me to do that, like Shanta and Indra, which is wonderful. And my other languages, I had French in high school and university. I did university level French, not fluent, and also Japanese at some university level. Those are my 2 languages.
Good morning. I'm Manishini or Christine. I discovered Sanskrit here with Bharati back in 1985 or so, and have sporadically come back to the ashram for that and studied a little bit more with Manorama, who learned here from Guruji. And I love bhakti yoga. I love chanting. I don't know what the brain is doing with all of that, and I'm curious to find out. Other languages are a little bit of Spanish and more of Italian.
I'm Scott. I'm from Ananda Ashram, originally from Brooklyn. And I came here in the late 70s, and I have a great appreciation for many facets of Sanskrit. And studied Spanish for about 6 years in school and French for a year in college, and happy to be here.
Hi, good morning. My name is Ty. Everyone knows me as Ty, but it's Tyrone. And I'm in my infancy stages of Sanskrit. I was invited here once to work, and I fell in love with the chanting, and I do yoga, and I meditate, so I'm really interested into getting a deeper understanding of how this works and how it affects your body and brain from everything I've learned from everyone else here that is here. So thank you for having me. And other languages, I've learned Latin and Greek roots a long time ago to learn the language of English, and I know some Spanish and a tiny bit of French, just the foods.
Yeah, Matt introduced yesterday, so let's go on to Kiranavali.
Hi, my name is Kira Navali. I live here at Ananda Ashram and was first introduced to Sanskrit by Gurji. We have great teachers here. We have a great Sanskrit program here. I love the sound of chanting. And in terms of background of languages, I loved Latin very much. It's been very helpful with just understanding language, but it isn't spoken. Anyway, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I also introduced myself yesterday, but I'll recap. My full first name is Jankana, and my middle name is Gina, which evolved out of people not being able to say Jankana, and it's also something that's meaningful from the Jain tradition that I grew up with. And I am in Somerset, New Jersey currently, and the languages that I know are Gujarati from home and having it spoken around the household, a little bit of Hindi from a year in college, and Spanish from high school, and a little French. And my interest in Sanskrit, I think, I wasn't really sure why I was interested. I was thinking more about it. I think it has to do with the sacred mantras that are meaningful in Hinduism and also Jainism. And I just share one extra thing. There's a lovely book that I've been looking at that combines Jain, Buddhist, and Hindu prayers. And I just read the foreword. It was published first at Ananda Ashram.
Wow.
I forgot that was true. So there's something here that is drawing me here again. And I'm volunteering you now to talk about it.
Good morning. My name is Susan. I was born in New Jersey to parents from south of India, Kerala. English and Malayalam were spoken in my home, but more English. Everyone laughs when I speak Malayalam. My other languages, varying degrees of French, Spanish, and Portuguese. And my interest and study of Sanskrit actually began at the sister ashram in San Francisco. I took lessons with Ma Ba, who said, you need to go to Ananda Ashram and study with Dr. Lad. And that was the first of a few magical experiences here. And yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Devin. I consider myself a lifelong student of Sanskrit, and I can speak a couple languages just to get by, and still a student. Thank you.
Hello. Hi. Just coming in. We're telling.
Name, where you're from, and your background with Sanskrit and other languages.
From here, Ananda, and I always loved languages, starting with Hebrew in Hebrew school. And then I studied language in college, and then when I met the Guruji, I was very attracted to the Sanskrit as well as the Guru energy, and so therefore I am here. And Indira, when I first came here, It's kind of in the middle of the summer one time, and Guruji said, Indra, you catch her up, me. So she gave me private class, catch me up on. That was it.
It was my grace.
Introduced myself yesterday. I'm Chaitanya. I live in New York, Long Island, and the Catskills, and my exposure to Sanskrit, to be correct, started at Hindu camp actually when I was younger in the Poconos, but before that through the temples in India I was made in Tirupati, and now I'm studying really Sanskrit at the ashram since January, also on scholarship recruited by Bharati, and it's amazing. It does a lot of different things for me, anxiety, familiarity. It just resonates, and healing as well without being able to quantify it yet. And I hand it on.
I think we're good for, that we've got most of the room, and thank you all so much for sharing. I have known Karuna for so many decades. I didn't know she had enjoyed Hebrew. That's wonderful. Language that writes in the opposite direction, among other interesting things. So, thank you all. We're going to open with reviewing the alphabet. So, the sheets in your handout are not numbered, but I'm going to refer to them as if they were numbered. So, if you have a pencil, you might want to number as we go along. So, number 1 is invocations. Number 2 is the alphabet. So, we're going to be starting with number 2 and reviewing the sound. As we talked about yesterday, if you see a dot under or a line over, you may assume that it is different than English unconsciously. But part of what we're teaching in this weekend is how to read the transliterated Sanskrit correctly. So the first piece of that is that you need to listen and not think that, if there's no dot, it's just like English, because the pronunciation is a little more different. So we're going to start with the vowels and move on.
Repeat, please. So let's just feel that. You don't have to go any further. These are all Bij mantras sitting there waiting for us to feel.
Moving to consonants. As we talked about yesterday, initial consonants in Sanskrit are less aspirate than English. So if you see something with an H after it, it is not an H, it is just indicating that that letter has a little extra breathiness. But the letter before it has a little less breathiness. So we did experiment yesterday with the word king. And we went around the room, and it's always interesting to me to do it in a group, because some people really do aspirate king more than others. But if I were to say it like the first ka in Sanskrit, it would be king. King. And that does not sound to my ear really like English. If I'm talking about a queen and a king, it's a king, it's got a little more air behind it. So this is not to have you think too much, but begin to attune your ear. So as we go along, we're going to notice that at the end of each row is a nasal that goes with that part of the mouth. So we have this in English too, only English is, as we've talked about, completely not phonetic. So this is the great challenge. Not everybody, but probably most people in this room grew up learning English as a first school language anyway. So it is very helpful to learn spelling at a young age, because English spelling does not make much sense sometimes. And we have grandchildren, and the 7-year-old is so proud to be able to read now. She's, everywhere she goes, she reads signs out loud. She just practicing reading. And some of the time she's sounding things out with all the tools at her, everything she's been taught, and it doesn't work because it's so unphonetic that you just have to sight read that word in English. So Sanskrit is a complex language, but it is logical and it is phonetic. There's only 2 letters where there is some variability, and we will talk about them as the weekend goes on. Ka, ka, ga, ga, nga.
Together.
Ka, ka, ga, ga, nga. Ka, ka, ga, ga, nga. Ka, ka, ga, ga, nga. Cha, cha, ja, ja, nya. 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 So again, back to our English assumptions. There are 2 kinds of T's that don't have an H behind them, and then other T's with an H. So if we say, yesterday I did Tom, I'm thinking, what's a good English word that's not a name that we say? Tomorrow. Everybody say tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Feel where your tongue goes.
Tomorrow.
Your tongue goes not behind your teeth, but a little bit back. And it is also a little bit aspirate. So cerebral letters are a little bit further back with the tongue, and the first one is going to be less aspirate. So if I were to say tomorrow, like the first ta, it would be tomorrow. Tomorrow.
You take the tongue up to the hard palate or the top of the gum, that
The
area.
ridgy part, yeah. So this is just for you to, again, clear your mind of expectations about that English is normal and we are doing something different. We're just moving the tongue around. So curling it back a little bit on the ridgy part, we have da, ta, da, da, na.
Together.
Da, ta, da, da, na. Da, ta, da, da, na. Da, ta, da, da, na. Now, this next series is easier in a way because all you have to do is stick your tongue behind your teeth. Da, ta, da, da, na. 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 Easy again, we come forward in the mouth to the lips. Ba, pa, ba, ba, ma. Ba, pa, ba, ba, ma. Ba, pa, ba ba ma. Pa pa ba ba ma. Om.
The semivowels ya, ra, la, and va. Yara, la, va, yara, la, va. Together.
Yara la va, yara la va.
Yara la va, yara la va.
Yara la va, yara la va.
Yam ram lam bum, yam ram lam bum.
Yum ram lum bum, yum ram lum bum.
Yam ram lam bum, yam ram lam bum.
Yum ram lum bum, yum ram lum bum.
Om.
Sibilants and ha. So first sibilant, as we talked about yesterday, is like English sh. So we can all say sheet. The second one, the easiest way to find it is to take your tongue back and do ta, and in the same place make sha. Ta, sha.
Ta, sha.
Beautiful. And the last one is very easy again. It's like son and Sally in English. The tongue goes behind the teeth.
For those palatal letters in the second row of the consonant group, if you just smile and you make cha, cha, ja, ja, nya, you've got it well enough. And this first sibilant is a palatal, so you just smile, sha, and you have it.
Or you think like sh, either works.
Or you think like sh.
Sha sha saha, 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 sha sha saha. Question. Okay, so Seth is being appropriately strict today. He says for in-person questions, you're supposed to go stand in front of the mic so that people from afar are a little more included.
This mic here.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
she's just going around carefully.
Sorry.
And it looks a little high for you. So
I'm not hearing the difference between the first and the second sha. I'm hearing sha sha.
it's not easy to hear. Yeah, but I will do it again. Everybody pronounce sha.
Sha.
And now sha.
Sha. It's
But
very subtle.
It is not easy to hear, but it is very easy to do correctly. You just look at where's your tongue. So for the first one, sha,
Sha.
sha,
Sha.
and the tongue makes contact mostly with the roof of the mouth. And the second one, you're curled back. Sha.
But remember, for the first one, the palatal, you just smile, forget everything else.
Sha.
The second one, you just take the tongue up to the ridgy part above the gums, and you've got something similar, but it's SH-like sound.
It is not easy. One way to practice the difference between those sibilants was gifted to us many years ago by an old ashram friend. He pointed out that the Sanskrit word for headstand has all three sibilants in a row. So we're going to review that again. Sheer.
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 Same as a sheer cliff, right? And now you say sha.
Sha.
Sana.
Sana.
Sheer.
Sheer.
Sha.
Sha.
Sana.
Sana.
Sheer Shasana.
Sheer Shasana.
Headstand. So it is, training the ear is challenging. And if it's a word I've never heard before, I'm not always as sure as I would like to be, if someone is speaking fast in particular. but I can make it correctly by paying attention to where I'm talking. So one more time, Shirshasana.
Shirshasana.
Okay, a lot of you were correct, I could hear. So this takes practice, but the next verse we're going to review gives a little bit of an idea of how we approach practice. So on unnumbered pages, this is the first verse. Oh, next page, Jalabindu. Do you want to lead?
Mhm. I'll take that sheet.
Ah.
So we'll do call and response for this. But we'll chant the whole thing first together. Why don't we do that?
Okay.
Om Jalabindu Nipatena Kramasha Puryate Gata Sahetu Sarva Vidyanam Dharmasya cha Dhanasya cha Dharmasya cha Dhanasya cha. So let's do a little bit all together. I'll lead you and then you'll do a little bit with me. Jalabindu Jalabindu Nipatena Nipatena Kramasha Kramasha Puryate Puryate Gata Gata Sahetu Sahetu Sarva Sarva Vidyanam Vidyanam Dharmasya cha Dharmasya cha Dhanasya cha Dhanasya cha. Let's do it all together. Jalabindu Nipatena Kramasha Puryate Gata Sahetu Sarva Vidyanam Dharmasya cha Dhanasya cha Dharmasya cha Dhanasya cha. Om. By the falling of drops of water, one drop at a time, the jar gradually gets filled. Like that, step by step, is the cause of attaining all knowledge, correct behavior, and wealth. Should all happen slowly.
Vidya is actually a lovely word because it also means sciences. So, and this is in the plural. So you can take it all knowledges, if you want to say, all sciences, all fields of study. This is a very comprehensive mantra. And as we talked about yesterday, I like very much that it includes correct behavior. Because if we are trying to create good habits, they don't go overnight. Like people's experience with New Year's resolutions. You know, I will do all of this 7 days a week, and but little by little you can build. Yeah. So we have time to intro one more verse. And after, come on in. So we might get to this verse before the break or not. We're coming back to writing. After we have our wonderful brain lectures, we're going to go back to combining consonants. And we're going to be combining with Ra.
So at 11, Paras, Ken, and Sarah will be here to do a little bit of snippet on the brain work. Then we will be back at 11:45 to wrap up the morning Sanskrit program as we're doing. And this is going to be the program this morning, this afternoon, and tomorrow morning. And then tomorrow afternoon, we're going to combine with a panel discussion, and hopefully all of you will be involved.
So let's do Vakratunda chanting only, and then I'm going to introduce Ken and want to say a word or two about the experiment. But just to have previewed what we're going to be learning to write this afternoon, if you go, how many pages in? Roughly in the middle,
Yeah.
you get a mantra for Lord Ganesha. So keep scrolling back.
It's about halfway in. At the top, it will say mantra for Lord Ganesha, and we really apologize for not numbering these pages. But it begins with Vakra Tunda, but at the top, mantra for Lord Ganesha.
Vakratunda,
Vakratunda,
Mahakaya,
Mahakaya,
Suryakoti,
Suryakoti,
Samaprabha,
Samaprabha,
Nirvignam,
Nirvignam,
Kurume Deva,
Kurume Deva,
Sarvakaryeshu,
Sarvakaryeshu,
Sarvada,
Sarvada.
Vakratunda Mahakaya. Repeat. Vakratunda Mahakaya. Suryakoti Samaprabha.
Suryakoti Samaprabha.
Nirvignam Kurume Deva.
Nirvignam Kurume Deva.
Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada.
Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada. Om.
Om Gurave Namah. So I want to share something personal about the brain. There are two things that have resonated with me very much being here for this weekend. One is that when I first came to Ananda Ashram, Guruji hosted a lot of people from many different traditions. We had all religions and a ton of science represented at this ashram. So it was very common to have Sanskrit chanting program followed up by a lecture from a physicist on the relationship between quantum physics and meditation. That was part of our early experience. The other part that was really more, actually I'm not sure, I should ask Bharati. From my point of view, maybe more San Francisco related, was that Guruji would stop in the middle of Sanskrit classes and teach some neuroanatomy. Two things he came back to again and again. One was cranial nerves. We wrote out the cranial nerves on the blackboard and copied them in our Sanskrit notebooks.
Circle of Willis, I remember.
Circle of Willis was the other one. Arterial blood flow to the brain. So this was part of our early Sanskrit education, and it is pretty amazing that we are coming full circle so much later in life to have experiences like this weekend. Before I turn everything over to Ken, I want to give Gladys an opportunity. Maybe I should let Ken speak to this, just about the caps. Yes. But I will say briefly, anybody in this room who is not already signed up is very much invited to be part of this study. And you can hear a little bit more about it from Ken, but one thing that would be useful is they brought 4 sizes of caps. So if you know that you want to undergo this wonderful experience, to have your brain looked at relative to Sanskrit experience, it's somewhat helpful if you can participate in sizing at some break. The first time Ken brought this equipment, I really wanted to do it, and it didn't fit me. So, and they disinfect it after every use. So in order to make the flow more efficient, you might want to see Gladys. And any questions are supposed to be, you're supposed to come up here to ask.
Oh, yes, this is important.
We are practicing doing what Seth says today.
Are you going to be wearing the caps here while you're listening?
No.
Or are you
No.
going to be going upstairs to, okay.
Yeah,
Upstairs.
no, people are going to be leaving here and going out for about an hour to have the CAP experience. And there's a sign-up list. And we will break now, and actually, maybe we'll just start moving out. And if Ken or Gladys, if you want to speak about it right now, that might be efficient while we get our laptop out of the
They
way.
have to change the headphones.
Seth, is it perhaps a bit loud? I don't know. Oh, is it okay? Okay. I'm going to be moving the chair in a minute. Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. I'm going to be up here alone in a few minutes. So, good morning, everybody. Namaskar. It's really a pleasure to be starting the next day of our retreat. As Shanta and Indira have told you, we have a plan for different sessions throughout today and tomorrow, and we'll continue to elaborate. Sarah and I just met to go over our plans for the neuro part. Welcome to everybody who's online, by the way. And I want to remind everybody that we are doing this study, this experiment upstairs in the music room with this near-infrared spectroscopy system which measures brain activity while you're doing different functions. I love that story about Dr. Mishra and the focus on neuroscience and memorizing your terms. I had a guru in India who used to say, you should be able to map your brain in your own meditation, and you should keep notes on that, Sri Singh. And I did for years. I have notebooks full of, before I ever turned on an fMRI camera. So, but anyway, just quickly. So the focus of the experiment, and we'll talk more about it as we go into tomorrow and as we start to think about, as Sarah mentioned beautifully last night, what are the real questions and where should we go next? But what we're set up to do right now is for people to come upstairs and to participate in essentially, Gladys, I guess it's about a 45-minute commitment of time?
Yes, we can round up to 55 maybe.
Okay. So it's basically an hour. And what you're going to be doing in that hour, and Gladys can speak a little bit about this, we set up the brain imaging cap and you know, that takes a few minutes. And then there's going to be a structure to the experiment where you begin with a kind of a baseline study where you're watching some images and we're measuring brain. And then you shift into the Sanskrit part. And then you shift into a meditation as we do in fire ceremony. Close your eyes and meditate for about 20 minutes. And then there'll be a cue, an om, that tells you that we're done. The whole time we're measuring your brain from beginning to end. So it's a lot of data that we're acquiring. And then at the very end, we redo the thing we do at the beginning to kind of get the brain baseline. There's a lot of interesting questions we can ask. It's a very simple experiment. And as Sarah was saying yesterday, there may be even better ones we can do next. But what this study is doing is it's looking at the act of meditation and how it is affected by what precedes it. And what precedes it is going to be one of two conditions. And we're going to ask you to play along with us. In one, you simply listen. One person will listen only. And another person will be assigned to a condition where they're essentially chanting. So they hear beautiful presentation by Indira and then they chant. And those are things that we'll explain to you. But ultimately, we're looking at this immersive Sanskrit activity for a certain amount of time, and then the transfer to meditation. And when we look at the brain, there's a lot of stuff we can look at that we don't need to dig into this moment, but the brain can really show you, even after minutes of some behavior, changes in the connections. And so we want to explore that. And so the more people that are willing to sign up, the more likely we are to have results that we could really interpret and learn from. And we think that this is a worthy paradigm or experiment to begin to explore meditation in Sanskrit. There are so many other things we can, should, and will do with other experiments as we go forward. But it's also a fun experience, and I hope interesting to folks to see how the neural data is acquired, like sort of the cook's tour of the things you're hearing about with the brain, how we actually do it. So I hope that this is going to be of interest. And let me have Gladys, my colleague from Yale, who is basically trying to organize getting folks in. Gladys?
Oh, yeah. Hi, everyone. So thank you to everyone who has already signed up. I'll be here for a little bit longer if anyone would like to sign up now. I guess while Ken is talking, we'll also leave a sign-up sheet available here. We are limited to the cap sizes we have. We have 4 different sizes, and they need to be cleaned between use. So we can't have 2 people with the same head size go back to back. So I will be here. If you find me outside, I'll have my measuring tape, and we can see what cap size you are, and then we can organize a good time for people just to make sure that those times can be staggered. And we have one person at 1:30 p.m. So person at 1:30 p.m., you know who you are. I'm not allowed to say names because that isn't that we have an IRB. We can see you maybe a few minutes before. We'll measure your head and make sure we have your cap ready for you. And everyone else who is participating tomorrow on Sunday, feel free to come as well today to have your cap measured. We have a few times already set for tomorrow, and that we should be fine with that so far. Yeah, and I think especially if you have availability tomorrow morning or later in the afternoon, that would be great.
Right.
Yes, and if you've already signed up, please do meet with me a little later today to find a time that works for you.
Excellent. Thank you, Gladys. And Shanta, I think you had some comment?
Yeah, just really quickly,
Yeah.
some of the ground rule here. This program, while they're doing their treatments upstairs, we're going to continue here at the same time.
Right.
So if it's going to become your turn, they should come here, and then you'll bring them upstairs? Is that it?
Yeah, we'll arrange if we know the person and when they're coming, then they just have to go through in the music room and up
Okay.
to Naren's
Just want to make sure this
space.
program continues the whole.
Yeah, we don't want to interrupt
Yeah.
the ongoing program. So there are a lot of times available, and we have the equipment. I also just would mention one last thing. Another thing that we're going to learn from this is we have a questionnaire that we will give you afterwards that asks about your meditation experience and what you were doing while you were meditating and your Sanskrit experience. So we get that information, and we can sort of relate it to the brain. It's a correlation to the brain. And so that is maybe where the real action is going to be, understanding the differences as a function of experience. And so even the questionnaire is an important, the brain cap is one thing, but the questions we ask are the way we make sense of that data. So we look forward to answering questions about this and going further. And Gladys, thank you very much for you and Virginia, my 2 Yale colleagues, for doing this and for being here for us this weekend. So, so in terms of the presentation now, and this afternoon, Sarah and I have met and realized that the way we'd like to do it is the session right now. I'm going to dive into language in the brain because that was the next topic, and then we'll take questions, both of us. But I'll make a presentation in these 30 minutes or so, or a bit less. And then we'll take questions. And then this afternoon, Sarah will make presentation, but we'll both sit for questions. And we might do something similar. Tomorrow, I think in the morning, since we're focused on, the work on mindfulness in its benefits to health and mental health, we'll probably speak at the same time. But for now, I'll make a presentation. Sarah will make this afternoon. It seemed to be a good way to go forward. So with that, I'll begin. And again, thanks, Gladys. So for those of you who were here last night, you know that what I talked about was really 30,000 feet. It's the brain is really interesting and magnificent. Science and yoga can communicate and learn from each other. Jnana yoga is an important path that links science, but ultimately meditation and Sanskrit and deep philosophy, and that question, who am I, which this magnificent brain can articulate, is where the science shifts to the experiential. In some ways, what I was trying to say last night is, we've got this extraordinarily complex evolutionary outcome. And it's really good at doing a lot of things like remembering and guessing and moving forward. But it also has this other ability. We are cognizant of our inner state. One thing about the human brain and consciousness is that we're aware of what's happening on the inside. It didn't need to be that way. That the evolution of this conscious brain, which is able to understand its own internal activity, its thought, its memories, its visual images, its emotions, its feelings, its physiological state. And so because the brain is this consciousness supporting system is capable of turning inward, it leads to Koham, who am I, which is the only great question, as Ramana Maharshi would say, who am I? So that was the 30,000 feet in maybe a 2 minutes summary. And I apologize for getting off in lots of nerdland stuff, as I always do. What we then said, and Sarah came in last night and very beautifully talked about the search for questions, as well as the amazing work that she and others do in clinical medicine. So where we want to go now is down into the next more detailed focus. Not why do we do meditation and why do we do science and how do they talk to one another. Been there, done that last night. But now we want to get to the content. This is about Sanskrit, the learning of Sanskrit, the chanting of Sanskrit, the writing of Sanskrit, and how that improves our inner world, that inner world that we're privy to, that supports the question, who am I, and the search for what's real, and is extraordinarily life-changing for those of us who study it and practice it in whatever ways we do. And so what I want to focus on now is the next question. So we stopped last night by saying, with these devices, and the device that this monk is wearing is a little different than the one we have upstairs, and it measures something slightly different. It's an EEG cap instead of an optical imaging cap, but it's not, it's very similar. And we live in a time where neuroscience and the studies of language, meditation, or any other thing can be combined, can be done together. And so one of the things that I just want to give you a very short tutorial on is what we're actually measuring when we measure the brain. We didn't go into that last night because it was more about how can we bring science and yoga together. So let me take a few minutes to kind of give you a sense of the tools, but briefly. And Sarah and I and our colleague Nabeen can answer any questions that people have to go more deeply into the methods and the measures. But neuroimaging, which is what we're doing here this weekend, is an umbrella term encompassing a variety of tools that allow us to map into the brain. And do you remember the image I showed last night of the glass fly-through, where you could see the internal structures and the internal activity? There are different brain imaging techniques to get both kinds of data, and then a lot of computational power to make them produce these images. And that's the image. I won't show it for more than 10 seconds, but I love it. Absolutely. I'm sorry. You're just going to have to suffer.
This is what we're...
Yeah, go ahead.
Is this what we're going to see of our brain?
No. I wish.
Similar imaging?
Well, so it's a good question. So those little lights going off, which is, brain activity, electrical activity, we measure with one kind of cap. It's not the one we're using today. But we are able to determine with the cap you have, to a certain degree, where those things are happening. So that activity pattern, you're not going to see the real time when I look at your data. We're not going to see over the course of seconds how different things are changing. We can construct that. But basically we're looking at where brain activity is with the technique we're using this weekend. We have other techniques. And the reason we're asking where things are happening is we want to see how the experience of meditation or Sanskrit is changing the connections in the brain. And so we want, if you have connections between, just to be silly, this and that in my brain, and the Sanskrit strengthens that somehow, then we would be able to measure it with the device. So, and then if we wanted to look at the structures of your brain that are part of that, and it's your fault, by the way, I'm showing it again. The structure is done with something called structural MRI. Yeah, please.
Next slide. The next slide.
The next one.
Yeah, this one. This little red, is this on?
Yeah.
This little red, orange, yellow in the back of the brain there, on this slide here, standing right in the middle of it, is usually what the type of, what it usually looks like. That's what we're doing, FNIRS. This here is blood metabolism. This is from a functional MRI,
right.
But this is really the same type of signal and the same, when you compile the data of what we're collecting, it will look something like this. This is usually what it looks like.
Right. And so you'll see these areas, and and you'll see in a minute, I'll show you. So this, and the device we're using with is more limited in how deeply it goes into the brain because it's a cap and it's portable and we can take it. When I do most of my research with this fMRI, we can see the brain from tippy top to the very bottom and everything in between. And as Sarah says, what we measure are changes in activation. So take a look at this for just a quick second. This is what it means to look at which parts of the brain are active when people are doing different things. So this is the most simple experiment you could ever imagine. The person is in an MRI system, we bring them in, and they either open their eyes or they close their eyes. And then they open their eyes for a certain number of seconds, and then they close their eyes. And then they open their eyes, and they close their eyes. And what is the difference between opening and closing your eyes is obvious. It's the seeing. It's having images. It's having visual input. When you close your eyes, it's gone. When you open it, it's there. And so when, as Sarah's saying, when we look at the blood oxygen level dependent signal, this change in brain activity indexed through changes in blood flow, what you can see is I look for parts of this incredibly complex brain that show this function. When the eyes are closed, there's no activity or low. And when the eyes are open, there's a lot of action. And when the eyes are closed, there's a little action. And, it's not a rocket science thing. Such an area is probably related to vision because the eyes are open. And we find them, as Sarah was showing you, in the parts of the brain that are in the visual cortex. And if we didn't find them there, we'd probably go into another business because we know a little bit about the visual cortex. So what the fMRI is showing us and what the FNIRS, I'm glad, Sarah, you reminded that it's the same kind of measure, is showing us is where things are, and very importantly, it can show changes in how things are organized. The other thing I want to mention, and this is also related to what we're doing with the NIRS. So if I ask you to count from 1 to 10 or tell me your opinion of the political landscape, it's not one piece of the brain that does anything. The way the brain works, and I showed you in that rotating brain, is that it is a complex system in which lots of parts need to come into sync. They need to be talking to one another. And depending on which areas are talking to one another, and this is called functional connectivity, then to that degree, you're doing maybe language, different areas are talking. Maybe you're listening to music, different areas are talking. Maybe some of those areas overlap. You're doing a mantra, you're doing a chant, some other areas will become active. So we don't really focus just on the areas that are involved, but on the connections and the patterns. And particularly when we're studying meditation, we look at the behavior of a few critical circuits. One, and this is an image of, it's kind of a horizontal image of the brain. This is a structural MR. And these red things are areas that are active when you're doing something. Now, in this case, this default mode network, it's not just one area, it's a bunch of regions that are working in sync. And this area, this part of the brain tends to become very active when your mind is wandering, as we are wont to do all day long. Remember, predict, remember, predict. Think about the past, think about the future. And that's very important for everything human beings do, because we take advantage of our past and we predict the future. And we have to say, I've got to go to the bank later, and I have to do this, and I have to do all that. So that network, which essentially connects memory with prediction and some other things, is very active when your mind is wandering, but also if you're distracted, if you're anxious, if you're not sure where you should be or what you should be doing, this network tends to increase, which means the connections between these areas increase, and we can see them, per your question, by not only changes in which areas are active, but which ones are correlated. They're kind of like talking to each other. But when you do meditation, what's the first thing you do? We say, be here now. And so when you're coming to a point where your mind becomes one-pointed, where there's the beginning of samadhi, you're not looking back or forward at that moment. And you become very attuned to things like the sounds around you, or the sounds inside you, or the light around you, or the light inside you. Your state of mind, what feelings are passing by as they pass and continue to go by. And this involves other brain networks that become more amplified, or even if I say focus on your breath and don't deviate from that, okay? Then when you need to bring complete attention to the sensory and somatosensory information from your nose, and not be thinking about where you're going for dinner or what you did yesterday, then that default mode network will reduce its involvement, and something called the salience network and some others will increase their activity. Why am I telling you now? Because when we do the meditation, we're able to look at those networks, even with our FNIR system that we have upstairs. So we can look at the changes that take place when you're meditating versus not meditating, when your meditation is rewarding versus not rewarding, or when you are problem solving or thinking or feeling anxious. I'm going to give one presentation probably tomorrow on the networks that are involved in anxiety and depression and how those are moderated. Sarah is looking at networks that are involved in motor control and sensory motor integration in Parkinson's patients. It's all about what we call the functional connectivity. So keep that in mind. We also can do other things with the brain, and if I brought the slides in, Jayshree would start doing this. For example, I use a kind of imaging that's called magnetic resonance spectroscopy. And what it does is while you're watching a movie, I can focus the resonance of the MRI machine, and I can recover the chemistry of your brain. We've published studies where we look at the excitatory neurotransmitter ratio relative to inhibitory. And so the brain, this sort of mapping into the wetware that I was ragging on about last night as exciting and interesting and useful, these are some of the details of what we can and what we can't do. So, yeah. Oh, of course. She's going.
I'm just looking at time. There's just about 15 minutes left. Did
Yeah.
you want to talk about language, or I just?
Yeah,
That's
sorry,
all.
you're right.
I just thought.
Thank you. Yeah, so what drew me to this, thank you, Sarah. What drew me to this really is that we started to talk about the experiment. So we'll leave that for now. And you should know that these techniques can be used for many different purposes, including to understand neuroplasticity, as we talked about last night, the ability of the brain to change connections, and also to look at the effects of learning. How does the brain change when you learn a second language, et cetera, et cetera? How does it change when you meditate? Thank you. So this is a short, it can be a short presentation. We're going until 11:45, I think, right? And then Sarah's doing the afternoon, so this session is will be primarily the remaining slides. So Sanskrit, music, chanting, the brain. What should we be thinking about as we follow Sarah's suggestion last night that while we're exploring Sanskrit and its special characteristics and chanting as a way into Sanskrit and its impact on mood and meditation and everything else, or its access to a literature of ancient wisdom that all the yogis I know, including Dr. Mishra, would say, if you don't understand the language, you're a slave of translators, and it'd be better to learn the language. He always said that. All the gurus, all the Sanskrit scholars would say that. So Sanskrit itself is what we're here to study, but it's a language. And I mentioned last night at the end of my talk, and this is really important, is it qualitatively different than other languages somehow? Devan. All languages are generative. All languages can cover everything. All have grammar, all have syntax. Even sign has this. So one of the questions, and I don't want to answer it right now, because I don't have, first of all, I don't think we have an answer. Scott alluded to some things last night about the chanting of Sanskrit, the structure of Sanskrit, the beauty of the language. I'm just putting it out there because this is a great topic for the science of the study of Sanskrit, how the brain uniquely responds to the opportunity to either hear Sanskrit, but especially to hear and produce it, and even more especially, as you'll see, to write it as well. So, what do we know about language in general? Well, it has been argued very convincingly, to my mind, in the area of comparative psychology, where there was a lot of work for many years on whether non-human primates have language. They certainly communicate, primates, complex communication, but is this to be characterized as a language? And I think, Devin, I don't know your read on all of this, but mine is that they don't have primate communication does not have the complexity and the generative structure that the complexities of the human brain and the folds allow. So I would argue that it's close, but it's not language. Would you agree? Or do you see it more on a continuum? Okay, so language has been argued to be uniquely human. That doesn't mean other species don't communicate, we all do. But there's something about language, and think about where language comes from. So I'm going to ask you two questions. What's language for? Forget about Sanskrit for a second, we're going there. But what's language for? To communicate. For sure. Okay. What else? Anything? To define. Yeah. How so?
Table versus table.
So,
Chair versus sofa.
exactly. So, what language does is it represents the flow of reality by symbols, by concepts.
This is a really deep, sort of a question, but if we, again, we're diving into the nature of the human mind and the meditating mind, what language is doing for us is it's, of course, allowing us to know that you got to pick up the milk before you go home today, and I like you, and how do I get to Yankee Stadium? Okay, and all of that. Communication. But it's also providing an inner world in which consciousness is able to, or in the mind, is able to represent physical things, the body and the world around the body by symbols. And so a great researcher, a mathematician named Stan DeHaan has argued that while we normally think of the evolution of human language because we needed to communicate, as you said, and there's no doubt, there's another view, which is that consciousness itself and the ability to have a sense of subject and object, and to build the complexity of memory and a story of I'm Ken, and I'm the same person now as I was last night, maybe slightly less Gabby, who knows, but same person. That is what language does. So language is a vehicle through symbol manipulation, toward a representation of a physical world and an embodied world that is also very good for communication. And in the laboratory that I've directed for many years, we have a lot of speech scientists and linguists and psychologists and neuroscientists, and most are focused on communication, how language is used to convey information from one brain to another, to bring them into entrainment. But language is also a way of representing the world. And Sanskrit is a very interesting language in this regard. I want to mention, in terms of how we study Sanskrit and reading and writing, this is a very important slide. So, language began, by some estimates, related to the development of the vocal tract, to the dropping of these structures to allow articulation. Somewhere on the order of 300,000 years, by some estimates of evolutionary linguistics. The take-home is a long, 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 long time ago. And what that means is we've had it as a species, as the thing we are essentially spend most of our life with, most of our time with. And it goes very far back into the evolution of this brain, and that's why the brain has a great deal of specialized pathways, those little red blobs we're showing you, that are specialized over a long period of time for communication, listening and speaking and understanding grammar. These are three things that the brain has a lot of what, to use a buzzword, is wired to do. And we have a very long evolutionary history with oral language. The written language, which I study in relation to the oral language in my research, and which I hope to give you just a bit of an intuition today, the written language is reading and writing, essentially, including Devanagari or transliteration or any other approach, has only been around for 5,000 to 7,000 years, give or take. 7 may be reasonable. The evolution or the discovery of written language, why we took our incredible ability with all this brain specialization to talk and listen and turned it into something that we could represent through our eyes and our hands, reading and writing. Why do you think we did that? Why was written language invented? It was invented by us. I would argue that oral language is not invented by anybody. It is reflecting the complexity of this 86 billion neuron magnificent thing. But written language is clearly a cultural invention. Why?
Mass distribution of knowledge.
There's a good one. That's my first thing I say whenever I give a lecture on my research. Mass distribution, which means if I tell you some secret to the universe, Indira, this is the secret of life, and I say it to you only, and there's no written language, it's gone forever. But if there's written language, we can pass it along. Go ahead, Indira. And
I just want to say,
can you, I'm sorry, Seth's rule?
no, repeat people's comments if they don't go up there.
Oh, oh, very good. Very nice. Yeah, okay. So, but anyway, written language allows us to expand the communicative space, the social space, by having a permanent record. And so the written language is a very useful invention. And then, as you know, and I because I don't have the time, I can't nerd out on this, so that's a good thing. But all the writing systems of the world are interesting. We study them all. How alphabetic languages evolved, how syllabic languages, how alpha-syllabic languages like Hindi, like Devanagari, how radical-based languages like Chinese, character-based language. Why societies chose these different things. It's a fascinating topic, and one that there is science on. It may go a little bit outside of what we're doing this second, but it's part of this Sanskrit and East-West question is, why are the languages different? And in the written form, why did we invent different ways of doing that? And what does written language do that we need? So again, we are wired for language over a long period of evolution, and the kinds of evolutionary linguists that I've grown up around at Haskins and Yale and some of our other colleagues are very interested in the evolution of language from one region of the world to another. Sanskrit and the Indic language family has a very deep and long history. Bharati also often talks about, Sanskrit, its place in the language tree, its place in the evolution of language. That's a very fascinating topic, and when you're thinking, is it relevant to what we're doing? Well, I think so. To understand where languages come from and how they relate to one another, and how they evolve and how they move. A few things on language in the brain, and then I'll stop. So language is something that we are wired to do, and one of the most beautiful areas of research. And the young lady, Virginia, who's here this weekend, works in a laboratory of my colleague, Richard Aslin, who studies how babies acquire language. Now, the first thing you need to realize is babies acquire language easily, in the most part. And they don't need to go to school to be taught to perceive. I mean, some babies don't, of course, but most babies, if you speak a lot to them and you give them enriched, loving environment and lots of oral language stimulation, they will develop a magnificent ability to receive and produce language. But some kids will not. But the vast majority will. And in a sense, babies don't need to go to school in order to know, in order to learn to read, to speak and listen. There's a great deal of specialization. And this is an example of a study that is really fascinating. Some of you may have heard of this kind of study. So if you take a newborn baby and you give them the brain cap, like we have here, and the baby is a Japanese baby. And in Japan, the language, the Japanese language, does not honor the distinction between ra and la. It's not in that language. That's why you might hear Japanese speakers and Asian language speakers mix up which ra or la. It's not that there's anything wrong with them, it's just not in their language. And I can't ever do ana in Hindi because it's not in my language, and the Hindi dental retroflex is not in my language. I'm trying, but I can't process them. So, but you know what's fascinating? If you look at a newborn baby, this incredible language machine, before it spends time listening to its language, when you look at the brain activity as you give them contrasting stimuli, the baby's response, the Japanese baby can hear the difference, the newborn, between ra and la because their brain is so good at hearing these phonetic discriminations. And so a healthy baby can hear things, and then you give them a year in Japan as a baby, and they never hear it again. And by the time they're 1 year old, they can't perceive it anymore. So you can see that the brain is not only plastic, but it also prunes itself. It changes itself. And this is one of the beautiful examples of how we are so specially wired for oral language. And there are a great number of brain specialized areas. And this is just an illustration when you use both brain imaging and patient studies, where we study which kinds of language functions people can or can't do depending on which areas of the brain are damaged. We can see that there's a rich representation of the many parts of language in the left hemisphere. And I want to give you, so I'm going to take 2 more minutes. We did start a little bit late. But let me sort of end with a couple of language ideas. This is a study of people listening to words or reading words using fMRI, the technique that we use. And this is milliseconds. Now, 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second. So this is what's happening at 55 milliseconds, at 500 milliseconds, at 1,000 milliseconds, at 2,000. In other words, 1 second or less and beyond. And what you can see is that when your auditory language and your ability to understand that language is well structured, then even 170 milliseconds after you hear the word, you're beginning to understand what it means. That's not a lot of time. Remember, 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second. But there is a very clear flow of regions of the brain that are active and communicating as you go deeper from hearing a speech sound to knowing it's the word cat and being able to understand that. And these areas are mostly in the left perisylvian cortex, in the auditory areas. When we read words, when we become literate and learn the writing system, then we see something quite similar, but it begins in the parts of the brain that see. And it translates that information to the parts of the brain that speak and listen. And so, as you go further in time, but this is not a lot of time, this is less than a blink of an eye, more and more brain regions will come into sync, will become active and involved. And I'll skip this for now. We can come back to it if there are questions later. And I want to mention, as the conclusion of this part of the presentation, so oral language is an incredible accomplishment. It has many functions: communication and representation. Yeah?
Just, you can repeat it.
I will.
Does it show, doesn't those slides show that the auditory was more powerful than reading? You know, like more brain is affected by vocalizing.
That's a great, so 2 things. If you're just, the question is, does auditory language have more intense, rich brain activity than the written language? Or the reading, the listening versus reading. So this is one of the things that it will be important for us over the course of the weekend. The answer is that we're so specialized for listening and speaking but not for reading and writing. Reading and writing is an exercise in relearning and reconnecting, what they call plasticity. So generally, reading involves a lot more distributed parts of the brain, but it's also harder in some sense. And oral language is much easier and much richer to represent. Let me see how I can end this, but still get my message across. Yeah, Jayshree.
I think the question was, when you were comparing those 2 slides, do you think that one was faster than the other one?
Oh, so the auditory system, yeah, so is one way of getting to the meaning of a word, because we're presenting words, and then we're looking at the words coming to the ear or words coming to the eye. So again, depending on how experienced you are at reading, that gets faster and faster, and eventually reaches a point where it becomes almost as fast as the auditory. But if reading does not develop well, and I study this in children, then it never catches up. So the auditory is what we're wired for, the spoken, and it is very fast. The written starts out slow, but if the child develops a rich written language, which involves not only reading but writing, then that will eventually catch up. It's a great question, and it becomes more closely allied with, and And the sort of the signature of success in reading is that, sorry, there it is. The signature of becoming a good, if I teach you Sanskrit and then I teach Devanagari, one of the things that's going to happen is that the areas of the brain that are involved in talking and listening are co-opted by the reading process, literally, in children and in learners. So that one of my linguist colleagues at Yale used to say, good reading, reading well and efficiently in any language, is parasitic on oral language. So and what that means in English is that if you become a good reader, and it gets to Karuna's kind of question, then reading and speech mush together, they blend together, and they reinforce one another. And so written language, reading and writing, I will give you my summary because I do need to end. I'm going to give you a couple of quick points of summary. Reading and language, spoken and written language differ in their naturalness. We're wired to talk and listen. Reading and writing is a relatively recent human invention that's useful. But in terms of neuroscience and language, here's what we can see. We're wired to talk and listen, and we need to be given rich stimulation, and we also can become bilingual. I have 1 or 2 slides I'll show quick. And that will strengthen these oral language communications. But interestingly, when we learn the literate code, when we learn to read and write, it not only depends on how good we are at speaking and listening, but here's the amazing thing. It also changes the way we hear and speak. The brain is very complex. So if I learn to read a language, that written language will not only depend on how good I am at understanding it and speaking it, but it will improve. It feeds back and improves my oral language skill. So one of the great discoveries from our research and lots of other people is that learning to read changes spoken language. Learning the written form reinforces pathways in the brain that allow us to become better communicators. So this was going to be where I got to if I didn't have to rush. That when we're studying the Sanskrit immersion, I can say 2 things that I would have shown you more slides, but I'm going to stop. One, that chanting itself, or oral language, has demonstrable feedback to strengthen the representation, the quality, as was asked last night, the rightness or the correctness of the representation. So the oral language system, the motor system, is very good at training language. Chanting, in that regard, the hypothesis for our scan is that chanting is a good thing. Okay? And I think there's a good chance we're going to see that, but we don't believe it, we test it. But then the other thing with regard to Devanagari, or learning to write, the act of learning to read and write itself, of taking that natural language, which does 2 things, communication and representation, and giving it a written veneer, that every word connects with a visual symbol, actually strengthens the oral language system. It also tends to help children who struggle with reading if we can reinforce the connections between the oral and written language. And let me end with this. Oh, and this is true in every language. This is a study we did looking at this connection between the oral and the written form that you might think might be different in different languages or writing systems, but we didn't see a jot of difference when we were comparing the brain in English, Hebrew, Chinese, and Spanish. We didn't have Sanskrit in here, but I wish we did. But I will end with the slide that looks at learning to read and become bilingual in Hindi, that a study I published some years ago, where we looked at young adults in Delhi who were proficient English, Hindi, bilinguals, and biliterates, which means reading and writing. I'm sorry, speaking and oral written language. And we looked at how those pathways in the two languages are connecting and reinforcing each other. How becoming a bilingual brain strengthens reading. But also we found some very interesting things, and I will give you a 10-second summary of this, which is that if you learn to read the two languages far apart in years or at the same time, that's what we looked at in these young adults, it leads to very different ways of representing these languages. There's no time. I was going to give a presentation on this. No time for it now, but I want you to grab something, which is becoming a bilingual brain, which is what we're looking at here, is also complex and benefits from the written language as well, because ultimately the bilingual brain, as we were saying last night, has many strengths and many advantages, whatever the two languages are. And reinforcing the motor, either the speaking or the writing, is a very good tool to strengthening the representation of the language. So I didn't cover everything I wanted to. This was just one of our sessions along the way. But I think as we think about the hypotheses for a study that will look at Sanskrit receptive and Sanskrit expressive, and how that impacts the brain state. We have a lot of information about which brain areas should be changing and how the written form should change those areas. So as we go forward, but not today, we can begin to look at the micro connections, that functional connectivity change as a function of different ways of teaching Sanskrit. We know enough about the language topology in the brain to make specific predictions about what should happen upstairs. So I hope that wasn't too unclear. Thank you. Okay.
Time afterwards for questions. Yeah. So my comment / question, which was this was wonderful, especially I love all of the ties together with different kinds of language, and appreciative of it on a new level of watching my grandchildren learn to speak. Exactly. And seeing it's absolutely amazing the look on a baby's face when you know they understand you. And they're a long way away from talking, right, but you can tell.
Exactly.
Anyway, but my comment / question is that I had a neuroanatomy teacher in college who, a lot of her research was about thickening gray matter, yes. But she said the really important thing was the connections. Right. She drilled that into us. But another thing she made us do was draw the brain in class, because she was a big believer in kinesthetic learning. And I was sitting listening to you thinking about literacy involves, there's a kinesthetic thing where you write, but even when you use your eyes, because for our experiment this weekend, we're not using eyes, right? But I was thinking about the motoric connection between the eyes and brain, because, the eyes are very wired, exactly. Right?
Exactly, and that's why, just quickly, when you become a reader in any language, and when you become a reader of Sanskrit as well, you are changing all these connections. Again, I just tried to give you at least a flavor of this. It's deep and complicated, but in many ways, your grandmother could predict it. It's common sense that learning the written code changes the structure of the oral language in very important ways, makes it more efficient. And you can see that in children. And that's why if certain kinds of learners are struggling with making these connections or with oral language itself, sometimes the experience of writing, the motor, the sequence, the planning, is a whole lot of stuff that is involving this mapping into the motor systems of the brain, where we do a lot of our learning. Is very beneficial, therapeutic for children who struggle. So this being able, being able to leverage the motor systems through eye, but especially through hand or through mouth, through chanting. Your grandmother could predict, but it strengthens everything. And so I think one of the things we could look at in the context of Sanskrit learning is, are there important individual differences in people's ability to make these connections, and can understanding the brain lead to better ways to teach? I will end with this. In my laboratory, we're doing a large-scale study with children, and the question we're asking with those caps is, can we understand the differences from one person to another so that we can shape the learning to the connections that are already there and leverage them? In other words, brain-guided learning. As we go forward, and so many things I couldn't cover, or my mistake, on which parts of the brain are involved, they might not have been that interesting anyway. All those areas are setting a foundation and hypotheses. And we can look at different approaches to teaching and how they change those very specific functional connectivities that I at least briefly showed you.
Ken, just real quick.
Yes, sir.
Perhaps you could pick this up after lunch.
Yeah.
But I just wanted you to hear these questions. You can mull them over during
Of
lunch,
course.
and when you come back, you can answer them.
Yes.
So from Denise Chapman, we have, so what happens with hearing loss? So you can address that. And then from Joy Goebel, is this a valid argument for the preservation of cursive in general as opposed to typing everything? A correlation of synergy between handwriting and the brain. So both wonderful questions. You can mull it over down at the
I
dining
will,
hall.
but I'm going to give you the yes/no answer to both.
Okay.
So the cursive issue may or may not be critical, but the handwriting and the motor seems to benefit children. And the first question, Seth, I'm getting old, was the very interesting one as well, which is hearing loss. So we're doing a study right now, my colleagues that are also working with Sarah, with cochlear implant versus sign. And I can talk about it after lunch, if there's interest. Sorry, guys. Really sorry. So, we need to go off mic that? Yeah. I'm going to get out of your way and get back to the business. Om.
covering a lot of ground. So we are going to go kinesthetic and motoric with the letter Ra. So we left off yesterday doing compound consonants. So first two ways you combine consonants. Every letter in Sanskrit comes with a built-in short a. To take out that short a, you either put in another vowel sign, we went over that yesterday, we'll do more this afternoon, or you stick another consonant on it. So how to meld consonants together, the first rule is if the letter has a final vertical line, you drop it. And we also covered, second choice is you stack it, like as in Ganga. Our third piece of compound consonants is the letter Ra, which is a wonderful mystical syllable, and it does different things when you write it. So Shanta and I look at this a little bit differently. He says which letter has the vowel or not. I just teach it what comes first. So I'm going to go with mine, and he will chip in later. But let's take the word prana to start. Prana means breath or life force. And it is, got the first consonant is a pa, the second one is a ra. So what do you do with ra when it comes second? You do a kickstand. So you have a pa, you write the pa first, and then you give it a kickstand to the left. And that gives us our pra. Oh.
And then long ah is an extra line.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't have it pushed all the way. Apologies to those of you at home. I'm going to repeat some of what I said. We're talking about combining consonants, and in combining consonants, we have to alter either the first consonant or the second or both in order to indicate that the vowel has been taken away, and this is two consonants together. Easy example in English is we have the word street. That's a triple. S-T-R, right? English, no problem, because English doesn't come preloaded with any vowels. We just write S-T-R. Here, we have to do some kind of change to take away the initial a. So if the ra comes second in a compound consonant, it's a kickstand to the left. So here we have the word prana, which means breath or life force. Same word we have in pranayama. So many people will have heard this. We talked a bit yesterday about the fact that you read Sanskrit left to right. We also read it top to bottom. Top to bottom comes up in the cases where we stack our consonants. And I'm going to have Shanta write Ganga as an example.
So if we can just look at this ra kickstand, it's hanging, it's on the bottom of the pa. It means that the pa lost the vowel and the ra gets the vowel. So this piece here with the extra line for the long ah is represented in this English part because the pa has no vowel in this word.
One way to think of it, I just say who comes first.
However you want to think about, that's what counts.
It may possibly be I am an eldest child of an eldest child for many generations. Shanta's a middle kid.
And it matters.
Different perspectives. Okay, so in terms of stacking, we did this yesterday. We did ga is normal. Ga doesn't change because it's not compounded. But between the ng and the ga, we have two letters together, just as we have with sing. And here we're going to write a smaller nasal on top and hang the ga underneath it.
So this is what the guttural nasal looks like by itself if it were to have a vowel. In this word, the guttural nasal, the end with the dot, has no vowel, so we have to take the vowel away from it. And what Indra is saying, we're going to write the guttural nasal because it doesn't have a nice line on the right to drop. So in this case, we're going to write the entire guttural nga. I'm squishing it vertically because now we're going to hang the ga, this last part, from it. And then give it the vertical line for the long ah. This means that the consonant on top, the nga, lost the vowel. And the ga, which is on the bottom, gets the vowel. So this part here is represented here. And it takes a lot of repetition to really get it, not to worry.
Just you do it and it comes. But similarly with the word prana, the kickstand is underneath. So if you're thinking also spatially, how are you reading this language? You read it left to right, top to bottom, and as we will see this afternoon, also outside to inside. A little bit less often, but that also comes up.
Very artistic.
Yes. So if we take the word sarva, sarva is a good example of when the ra comes first. Or as Shanta would say, where the ra doesn't have a vowel, the vowel goes to the va. So in this case, we are going to write sa, and then we're going to write the va.
We're going to write the va because in this case the ra has no vowel. So we're going to write the va so we have a place to grow the ra out of.
That's a lovely way to put it.
Completely opposite from the ra in prana, which was on the letter before it, which Indra noted. The ra kickstand took the vowel away from the pa. In this case, we want to take the vowel away from the ra by hanging the va under it.
And we're going to again read top to bottom.
So you could say, if I may, in English, if you want, to think about it left to right, top to bottom.
So what you write to show the ra in sarva, oh, Shanta did it already. I've always thought of it as like a shepherd's crook. But we had one student this spring who thought of it more poetically as a quail feather. So however you think about that shape where you go up and you curve, that is what ra looks like at the beginning of a compound consonant. So after lunch, we're going to write Vakratunda Mahakaya. So you have all the tools now with combining vowels and a lot of consonant combinations. And it's a lovely verse. It is good to ask. I don't know, did we do translation this morning? I don't think so. All right, I'm going to encourage people to, one more we should do with the ra coming first. Let's do dharma. So dharma means correct action. And Devenji, who did not properly introduce himself, is a fantastic scholar. I will not take the time to properly introduce him. I'll just say fantastic scholar. And he knows many verses and much understanding of what does dharma look like in different contexts. But I am usually thinking about dharma being, what am I supposed to be doing? What is my correct life path on any given day? And it's a wonderful word. So you have dha, and remember that we have a gap in the middle there. And you don't always need to have the roof on that first part. I don't usually write the roof on the first part. But in the middle of a word, you would have it, if it was compound word. But dharma, so then the next thing you write is the ma. You give, as Shanta said, you give a place for that little quail feather, that little shepherd's hook to attach to.
The Ra is probably the most interesting letter in the whole language and considered very cosmic.
You can do Ra-ra-ram. You can use it as a very powerful Bij mantra. And Guruji, when many of us first met him, he was Dr. Mishra, but he was Dr. Ramamurthy Mishra. Dr. Ramamurthy Sri Ram Mishra was his original name. If you're lucky enough to get older copies of his books, you see that.
Click on there.
So, yeah, we are going to run only 4 more minutes. We'll be ending in plenty of time to get to lunch. And what we're going to do now is just meaning of Vakratunda.
But hold on.
And we will be writing it after lunch.
One question that came during Ken's talk from Joy Goebel online. We were talking earlier this morning about the palatal row in the alphabet, the second row in the alphabet. Joy was, I think from what I understand, her question is, do you smile, and we're talking about smiling for the palatals, do you smile for the second row or the second column of consonants? So I would interpret that to mean we're talking about the gutturals, the second row of the consonants all the way across left to right. Those are the ones you smile for.
The palatals.
Palatals. The second row of consonants is the palatals, and those palatals, the cha, ja, and ya are the ones you'll smile for.
And I want to add, it's not obligatory that you smile, but it is a contrast again to, we have a CH sound, both unaspirate and aspirate. And if we contrast it with English, this is something Bharati is very aware of because Bharati's first language was German. So, and she had huge background in both Greek and Latin. So she does not usually talk about this, but she is very deep in linguistic background. She points out that when we say in English, church, oftentimes our tongue comes to our teeth. And don't quote me perfectly on this because it's a Bharati question, but the smiling keeps your tongue away from your teeth and reminds you that palatals really should be in the roof of the mouth. So we can say cha without a full smile, but we shouldn't be saying church with our tongue next to our teeth.
But
that's the answer to that.
I bet if Ken put the brain cap on you and you smiled while you said the palatal, it would register differently than if you didn't smile.
Smiling is never a bad idea. I think there's posters, at least around LA, maybe other parts of San Francisco, things like kindness, pass it on. What I have observed in my neighborhood is if I smile at people, it really, everybody's day is a little better. Some people you can tell, walking their dogs, they're barely awake, they don't want eye contact. But other people, it's a gift. It's a baby mitzvah, I think you could say. Anyway, let us do, we have 1 minute. 1 minute translation of Vakratunda.
We should chant first, yeah?
Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurume Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada.
We should give everybody a chance to find it, and then we should chant it one more time. We were allowed to run over. I know that.
All right, does everybody have Vakratunda? It's pretty much middle of your handout. Okay, so let us translate, and then we will all chant together before lunch. So this is addressed to Lord Ganesha, who is the deity in charge of all beginnings. And he is in charge of all beginnings because he is in charge of removing obstacles. There's not uncommon, it used to be anyway in India, that you would see a Ganesha on driver's, what do you call, front of the car, inside.
Dashboard.
Dashboard, thank you. Blessings for obstacles being removed. So first is case of address. O Lord Ganesha, so you who have crooked trunk.
Vakra is crooked. Tunda is snout or trunk. So they're describing Lord Ganesha here to begin with.
Mahakaya, big body. He
Yeah.
is not a skinny guy. Generous body. Surya Koti, and I forget if it is 10 million. Surya is sun, same as we have sun salutation. Koti, I think, is 10 million. So his prabha, his brilliance, is that of 10 million suns.
And you know that one, looking at the sun, one sun is hugely intense. You're talking about more than one? You're talking about 10 million here? That's really bright.
So it is this effulgent force of light. And what is the request that the deity is making? Nirvignam, without obstacles. Make nirvignam mama karyeshu, make absence of obstacles in all my works. Sarvada, always. There's another version of this, which I have to check metrically, probably still fine. Shubha karyeshu, in all my good works. I would say that what you pray for is, first of all, let me be doing only good works. And then there is no problem with all works. Sarva karyeshu sarvada. It's we will do writing practice after lunch, but let us chant it one more time together right now. Om Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurume Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada. Om. And if anyone does not have background, I forgot to mention, this is the elephant-headed god. So that is your image as you are addressing this deity. So thank you all, friends, both near and far. Those of you here, I encourage you to get fitted for a brain cap if you've not already done so. And we will start up again at 2:30. Thank you so much.
2:30 right here.